Hi, welcome to the Anna Karenina read-along. This is one of my favorite novels and I'm very excited to rediscover it and discuss it with you. Every 10 years, Tolstoy went through a big crisis and every day through a smaller one, so we can see how his interests and priorities change throughout the novel. The Arzamas terror was the crisis he had before writing Anna Karenina. He wrote, "Suddenly a melancholy, a fear, a terror such as I have never known came over me. Suddenly his life lost its meaning." Tolstoy, who was so talented, so successful, so wise, felt lost and confused. This crisis came out of the blue, but it marks the beginning of a new phase. 4 years later, he started writing Anna Karenina, and at first, he wanted it to be about private life, about the morals of his contemporaries, but it kept spreading and spreading, and sometimes even the author himself was surprised by the actions of his characters. Reading the novel for the second time is such a different experience. It's so full of life that I had to stop myself from reading so that my thoughts on the first part could be as fresh as possible. All the themes and symbols become so apparent that it's difficult to talk about them in the first part without mentioning how they reappear in the following ones. Still, if I wanted to analyze this book properly, I'd had to write it all over again, and I don't want to do that. I will mention some obvious things so that I can rest assured that we're on the same page. If you want to skip the super obvious stuff, the timestamps will be in the description. I will ignore certain aspects of the book, like the Emancipation Reform of 1861, or Zemstvo, or Oblonsky's Forest, but only because I'll talk about them in another video. Oh, and we'll discuss the epigraph in the last video. Needless to say, I'm not doing this chronologically. This video will contain spoilers for the first part of Anna Karenina. If you don't want to read it because you think that it's a soap opera, you're so deeply mistaken. It's not just your typical 19th century novel with the balls, with the high society, with the love triangles. And it's not just a cautionary tale, it's so much more than that. It's about looking for the right way to live, for the most authentic way. And no matter if you love it or you hate it, you'll ask yourself so many questions that by the time you're finished, you'll be a different person, or at least a different reader. Anna Karenina opens with Oblonsky's dream, well, except the famous line. So let's start by looking at our first happy or unhappy family, the Oblonskys. The husband, Stepan Arkadych Oblonsky, also known as Stiva, the wife, Daria Alexandrovna Oblonskaya, also known as Dolly, and their 5 children. Let's get the name problem out of the way. So Stepan Arkadych Oblonsky is Arkadych because his father's name is Arkady, and he's called Stepan Arkadych in formal settings. His wife, Daria Alexandrovna, is Alexandrovna because her father's name is Alexander. Her patronymic ends in ovna instead of ich because she is a woman. A few days ago, Dolly discovered that her husband is cheating on her. Stiva feels bad because he doesn't want to cause suffering to his wife, but at the same time, he falls in love so easily and he's so full of life that he can't control himself. His family life doesn't bring him happiness and he feels like he has to pretend. He's quite a likable character considering the circumstances. I really like the scene where his daughter feels secondhand embarrassment for him and she blushes. And because he understands why she's blushing, he also blushes. This is what Dostoevsky wrote about people like Stepan Arkadych. Such people are regarded as innocent and genial, good fellows, affable egos who do no harm, witty and enjoying the pleasures to the full. But they would get very angry if the kingdom of heaven were to arrive. Dolly, on the other hand, feels like she's lost her youth and beauty while taking care of the children and their home. She feels used and betrayed. She feels like a servant. Later, from her dialogue with Anna, we discovered how much she actually loved Stiva. She has always thought that she was the only woman in her husband's life, which made his infidelity even more shocking. Everybody is on Stiva's side for some reason, and he hopes that his sister Anna will convince Dolly to forgive him. You see, Anna is introduced in the novel as this person who can restore family happiness. We actually meet her in chapter 18. But until then, let's discuss Levin or Levin, depending on who you ask. It's Levin if you ask Tolstoy, and it's Levin if you ask the rest of the world. If I'm not mistaken, there are more chapters about him than about Anna, so if you hate him, oh boy. First, let's look at his family. In case you forgot, Levin's name is Konstantin, and he has a brother, Nikolai, and a half-brother, Sergei, whose last name isn't Levin, but Koznachov, and he's a famous writer. And Levin hates being introduced as Koznachev's brother. His debate with a professor about the link between the physical and the psychological is a waste of time, according to Levin. His other brother, Nikolai, isn't as successful. He's an alcoholic, but for some reason, Levin feels drawn to him. He has gone through many phases and now he wants to be left alone, but Levin wants to help him. In chapter 10 and 11, we get to witness this conversation between friends, Levin and Oblonsky. They love each other, but they're polar opposites. We already know that Stiva is on familiar terms with everyone, that he is friends with half of Moscow and Petersburg, that he does what everyone else does, and he's confident, and he doesn't have to try hard to succeed. While Levin, well, he's awkward and he comes from the countryside. According to Tolstoy's wife, he's Tolstoy minus the talent. Both of them are interested in agriculture, both are against trials, and both have a complicated relationship with religion. Oblonsky even mentions that all Levins are wild, and this is an allusion to the Tolstoyan wilderness, the freedom from convention. As you know, they're at this fancy restaurant and Levin feels uncomfortable. This is before his first conversation with Kitty at the skating rink. We'll get to it. From their dialogue, we discover how different their worldviews are. When they quote Pushkin, for instance, Oblonsky talks about lust, while Levin says that for him this is all in the past, but because he can't change the past, he feels unworthy of Kitty. You're married, you know this feeling. The terrible thing is that we older men who already have a past, not of love but of sins, suddenly become close with a pure, innocent being. It's disgusting. Oblonsky asks him, "What is to be done? The wife is getting old and you're full of life. Before you have time to turn around, you already feel that you can't love your wife as a lover, however much you may respect her." Excuse me? Getting old? Dolly is younger than him. Even if she wanted to have an affair, she wouldn't have the energy to do it, because she gives it all to his children and his home. And Levin mentions Plato's Symposium and the two kinds of love. One is common and it's about pleasure, and the other is heavenly and it's free of desire. In this scene, Levin is trying to talk about heavenly love, while Oblonsky is dragging him down and talking about Vronsky as if he's his rival because they're both in love with Kitty. Although it's obvious that Tolstoy sides with Levin on this, we can't really say that Oblonsky is entirely wrong. Levin struggled with his own desires and he himself isn't so pure. And although he likes to play the moralist, he doesn't have the right to judge his friend. As Levin's brother said, his mind is full of contradictions, while Oblonsky's isn't. He doesn't judge others and he doesn't judge himself. The two friends will never be able to close this gap between them. And this issue comes up over and over in the novel, and not only in this relationship. Since we mentioned Kitty, let's talk about the Shcherbatskys. The Levins and the Shcherbatskys have always been friends, and Levin fell in love with the whole family. Well, the feminine side, just as Tolstoy fell in love with the whole family of his future wife. After the oldest daughter, Dolly, married Oblonsky, and the middle one, Natalie, married someone else, Levin fell in love with Kitty, which is a nickname for Karenina. After spending 2 months in the country, Levin goes back to Moscow to propose to Kitty. In chapter 9, when Levin meets her at the skating rink, I found one of my favorite lines from the novel. I even wrote it down the first time I read it, and I wasn't the type, trust me. He stepped down, trying not to look long at her, as if she were the sun. Yet he saw her like the sun, even without looking. I think that most people experience this, like when you're in someone's presence or you're looking at a piece of art and it's so beautiful that it engulfs you, that you become a part of it. I love how we get to see Kitty's mother's perspective in the chapters when Levin visits them and proposes to her daughter. As the mother of an 18-year-old girl in the 19th century, her main problem is matchmaking. Should parents decide for their children when it comes to this? Should they let the children decide for themselves? Kitty has two options, Levin and Vronsky. Vronsky is rich, intelligent, well-born, a brilliant military courtly career, and a charming man. At the balls, Vronsky openly courted Kitty, danced with her, and visited the house, which meant there could be no doubt of the seriousness of his intentions. What else do we know about him? In the train, his mother tells Anna that he wanted to give his whole fortune to his brother, and that as a child he rescued a woman. Levin is very different. He doesn't want to play all these games. When he is introduced to Vronsky, he doesn't see a rival. He tries to see the good in him. The proposal was perfect. I wanted to say, I came for this, that, to be my wife. She was in ecstasy. Her soul overflowed with happiness. It cannot be. Forgive me. The scene after his proposal is painfully awkward. Not that this wasn't, but you get why he hides in his country estate. This countess with her spiritism, Tolstoy was very interested in this trend, and he even wrote a comedy called The Fruits of Enlightenment, and it's not his best work, but it's fine. One of her lines is amazing. She addresses Levin and she says, "You've come back to our depraved Babylon, aka Moscow. Has Babylon become better, or have you become worse?" Kitty's mother sides with Vronsky, while her father sides with Levin. And he says that, unlike Vronsky, Levin has serious intentions. And he's right. Vronsky never had a real family. His mother had many affairs and his father died. He has no intention to get married. And all these dances and visits don't mean as much to him as they do to Kitty and her parents. Levin experiences his love for Kitty as some kind of external force. And when she rejects him, he's upset, but he still has himself. He doesn't want to be anyone else. You might have noticed that the men in this novel don't put all their eggs in one basket, that they have other interests besides their families or future families. Levin goes home and he wants to restore his country estate to its former glory. But we'll talk about his plans, his dog, and his house in part 2. Okay, we got Levin out of the way. Now we can finally talk about Anna. I remember the first time I read it, I was so confused about Levin's first chapters. I didn't understand his point in this story. Yeah, he's an acquired taste. His chapters get better, don't worry. Anna finally comes to Moscow. I felt like in her chapters, Tolstoy was trying too hard to make certain things clear. I don't know, maybe he didn't expect his readers to pay any attention while reading. It's interesting that first we find out that Vronsky doesn't like his mother, and then that Anna and his mother had this long conversation and his mother praised him so much. You can say whatever you want about Tolstoy, but he was an incredible portraitist. Restrained animation played over Anna's face. It was as if a surplus of something so overflowed her being that it expressed itself beyond her will, now in the brightness of her glance, now in her smile. She deliberately extinguished the light in her eyes, but it shone against her will in the barely noticeable smile. I can't say too much about the bad omen, as Anna calls it, in fear of spoiling things. But even without overanalyzing it, We can see Anna's reaction to it, we can see Vronsky's reaction to it, and it makes things pretty clear. Her lips are trembling and she's almost crying. A watchman, possibly drunk, was run over by a train. If you're not careful, you'll be run over by a train. Something terrible will happen. So watch out, Anna. Don't get drunk. It's also the first time she's separated from her son. Vronsky gives 200 rubles to the widow. And to put this into context, you could buy 50 kilograms of tea with this money. I'm sorry, this is the only frame of reference I have. Now let's talk about the ball. When an author is stating something over and over, you know that it's important. Kitty imagines Anna dressed in lilac for the ball. She expects her to be this Petersburg society woman whom everyone admires. But she sees that Anna is not like a society woman or a mother of an 8-year-old son. She lives in this higher world, full of complex poetic interests that are beyond Kitty's reach. At the ball, Anna appears in a low-necked black velvet dress, and Kitty felt that she had never before realized her full charm. She now saw her in a new and quite unexpected light. She now realized Anna could not have worn lilac, and that her charm lay precisely in the fact that her personality always stood out from her dress, that her dress was never conspicuous on her. There's a huge difference between the way others see Anna and the way she sees herself. Throughout the novel, we see different characters wearing lilac, and when we connect all the dots, we can understand what it says about them. We will see Kitty herself wearing lilac, so try to pay attention to that, and when you get to that passage, you will understand this one better. Okay, back to the ball. Anna dressed in black, Kitty dressed in pink. Anna knows that Kitty loves Vronsky. When Vronsky bows, Anna doesn't respond. When Kitty dances with Vronsky and looks at him lovingly, he doesn't respond. Kitty looked into his face, which was such a short distance from hers, and long afterwards, for several years, that look, so full of love, which she gave him then, and to which he did not respond, caught her heart with tormenting shame. Poor Kitty! If you look back at Levin's reaction when Kitty says no, you can see how different it is. One look from Vronsky, or rather its absence, torments her years later, while Levin's reaction to Kitty's rejection is more like, okay, no wife and kids for now. I mean, he's upset, but it's not the same. If he really loved her, like Tolstoy described in earlier chapters, he would have had a stronger reaction. In the 70s, when the action takes place, Russian balls weren't any different from European ones. They had the same dances, mazurka, quadrille, waltz. They respected the same rules. The waltz is the most intimate, the quadrille is more strict. One can discuss recent events, but flirting would be inappropriate. We know that Kitty and Vronsky waltzed together and were together in the quadrille. Then why is she so obsessed with mazurka? Well, this is the dance when you have more time to talk with your partner, and it's usually the last dance before dinner. And Vronsky chooses Anna. Anna smiled, and her smile passed over to him. She lapsed into thought, and he too would turn serious. Some supernatural force drew Kitty's eyes to Anna's face. She was enchanting in her simple black dress, but there was something terrible and cruel in her enchantment. Why does Anna dance with him? She knows about her own situation. She knows that Kitty is in love with Vronsky. Why? I think that it's the same reason she was unable to extinguish her light when she first saw Vronsky in the train. Later, when she talks to Dolly about the ball, she says, "I was the reason that this ball was a torment for her and not a joy. But really, I'm not to blame. Or only a little." She says this word exactly like her brother. Unable to control yourself, Anna? I think that she's already drunk. There's something that wouldn't be as obvious in translation. There's so much English in this novel. We first hear it from Oblonsky's children when they're playing with the train, and then from Vronsky when he says that Karenin's interests are not in his line, then from Anna when she tells Dolly that she has her own skeletons in the cupboard. Also, Kitty's nickname, Tiny Bear, yes, in English, reference to Goldilocks and the Three Bears, three sisters, three bears. It was given to her by Levin. Then, in the train to St. Petersburg, Anna reads an English novel. Anna Arkadievna read and understood, but it was unpleasant for her to read. That is, to follow the reflection of other people's lives. She wanted too much to live herself. She wants to experience all these things, but she is ashamed. Fiction and reality blend together, and the things she reads in the novel remind her of Vronsky of the ball. The things she reads about in the English novel will actually happen in the Russian one. And then she meets Vronsky at the station, and he tells her, "You know that I have come to be where you are." Let us finally meet the last unhappy family, the Karenins. The first time Anna's husband is mentioned in a positive light. Oblonsky got a job thanks to him. We also find out that, for him, jealousy is a feeling unworthy of him and his wife. He doesn't know anything about art, but he likes to talk about it. When he meets Anna at the station, he is trying to be funny. "Yes, as you see, your tender husband, tender as in the second year of marriage, is burning with desire to see you," he said in his slow, high voice and in the tone he almost always used with her, a tone in mockery of someone who might actually mean what he said. She tries to notice his virtues, like the fact that he's unbiased even when it comes to his relatives, or that he's a good and honest man. But unfortunately, she notices his weird ears, and she can't unsee them. Everything seems changed after Moscow. It's all mixed up. By the end of this part, the Levins are a mess, the Shcherbatskys are a mess, and Anna feels guilty for some reason. I'm doing 2 read-alongs at the same time, and believe it or not, Anna Karenina has so much in common with Crime and Punishment. It's amazing. If you have anything you'd like me to discuss, please write your ideas in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye!